Hello and welcome to another exciting tutorial on Davinci Resolve Color Grading 101. Let's discuss the basic concepts that are required to be properly understood before starting to color grade in Davinci Resolve. First, the cameras and the formats that the videos are recorded in. Most consumer cameras footage are in Rec. 709. High-end professional cameras and cinema cameras record footage in log and RAW formats. RAW is unprocessed information recorded directly from the camera sensor. This has to be debayed and processed before it can be viewed. Logarithmic footage, generally known as log, is very flat and desaturated. This is to capture the maximum dynamic range of the image. This kind of footage is not intended to be used without editing. Rec. 709 format footage is processed fully in camera with proper contrast and color and is not flexible for the purposes of editing. Next up, encoded files. During color grading, sometimes the colorist will be handed over encoded footage that is either ProRes or DNxHR. These formats are high quality and are compressed. The raw or log files are usually encoded after edits and are handed over to the next process like color grading. The encoded files are generally much smaller in file size compared to raw or log footage. During the encoding process, the metadata that is usually stored within the raw or log formats gets lost. Hence, it is quite important to note the details of camera footage in which it was originally shot with. ProRes and DNxHR are the most commonly used formats in post-production. Color spaces. Well, this is how the colors are represented in form of a chart. The CIE chart is standard reference to describe the color spaces. A color gamut is a range of chromaticities, that is, a possible set of hues and their respective maximum saturations. Think of gamut as borders of the color space. The Rec. 709 color space is shown in the picture. Whitepoint, as we humans, our eyes constantly adapt to environment using context and visual cues to define what is white. But digital sensors can't. We need to feed in the information on what is white in a color space. It is often expressed as color temperature and in Kelvin. Gamma can be described as how smoothly black transits to white on a digital display. It is often associated with a number like 2.2 or 2.4, and this number represents the shape of the curve from black to white or from white to black. Color models. There are quite a number of color models like RGB, HSV, HSL, LAB, YUV, and so on. These are a way of describing a color numerically. Davinci Resolve supports several of these color models and by default works in the RGB model. There are two workflows in Davinci Resolve: the color managed, like Davinci YRGB color managed, ASUS-CC, ASUS-CCT, and the non-color managed workflow, which is Davinci YRGB. It is quite important to know that when you have a raw or log footage and bring it into a timeline in Resolve, in case of non-color managed workflow, you will have to normalize the image manually using LUTs, which usually are provided by the camera manufacturers and are inbuilt within Resolve, or use the color space transform OFX. In case of a color managed workflow, when you bring in the raw or log footage, Resolve automatically guesses the proper color space and gamma of the footage based on the metadata and will normalize the image for you. This provides a quick and proper starting point to color correct and grade the footage. In case of ProRes or DNxHR encoded footage, which does not have any metadata, it has to be normalized manually. Again, there are two kinds of workflows within color grading: the scene referred and display referred. In the scene referred workflow, we have the source footage, which is usually raw or log, and we do the color grading in the camera color space, then transform it to the display color space and monitor it on the reference display. This workflow is better because color grading is done in the camera color space, which is far bigger than the display color space like Rec 709. The other workflow is display referred workflow, where the source footage is first converted from camera color space to display color space, and then the color grading is done while monitoring on the reference display. Both of these workflows has its own pros and cons. ACES, which stands for Academic Color Encoding System, is quite popular and is the global standard system for color management workflows, exchange, and archival purposes. Resolve has ACES color correction, ACES CC, and ACES color correction with TOW, called ACES CCT. Now in the color managed workflow like ACES, we have footage from different cameras like Sony, Red, Blackmagic Design, and when brought into the timeline, the input transform is applied to it by Resolve based on the metadata of the footage and is automatically normalized. And this gives a good starting point for color grading. Matching footage from different cameras and color spaces is now very simple, since all the footage is brought into a common ACES color space. Also, it is quite flexible for deliverables. In case it has to be delivered with Rec 709, the Rec 709 output transform is applied. In case if the deliverable is for theatrical display, DCI P3, then the corresponding output transform is applied. No other changes in color grading are required. Hence, it is faster, flexible, and more accurate. In case of non-color managed workflow, everything has to be manually done, and color space needs to be fixed, and color grading is done for the specific deliverable. In case of a change in deliverable, manual adjustments to color grades are required. In color managed workflow, LUTs can't be used, although there are workarounds to make it work. ACES has something called LMTs, Look Modification Transforms. In the case of non-color managed workflows, LUTs lookup tables are commonly used and is now quite a bit popular these days. And we have come to the end of the presentation. If you did like this video, please consider subscribing to this channel and hit on the like button. Let's dive deep into the Resolve color grading in the future videos. Thanks and have a great day.